4,
2,
1.
Aibo.
Balkans Calling. Voices from the region.
Welcome to the next Seafield episode of our podcast series, in which we're talking with academics that deal with our region or come from the region, doing research on the region. Today we have a very interesting guest, Sophie Gueudet. She is actually here in Regensburg as a visiting research fellow at the EOS within the program PeaceRep Ukraine. Otherwise, she's works at the London School of Economics, and she has a very interesting biography dealing with topics that I'm also very interested in, and we've been talking already a lot about all the shared interests. The idea is that we are going to talk a little bit about your research and your research interests. Perhaps first of all, I would like to point out that she has a book in preparation which is based on her PhD, on your PhD, which has the very instructive title Bridges over the Drina, patron-client relations between Serbia and Republika Srpska between 1995 and 2016. So this is the research that you've been doing for your PhD.
Exactly.
And perhaps could you say a little bit more about your PhD to start with, and perhaps also about your research interests.
Of course. So first of all, thank you for having me. I'm really enthusiastic to take part in this podcast. So without entering too much into the practicalities of my research, maybe I will just explain how my research topics evolved throughout the time. I got really interested in studying for my master dissertation because I graduated from a master in military history to see the wartime connections and patron-client system between Serbia and Republika Srpska. So from 1991 to 1995. And when I was researching this topic, I realized that there are few works on Republika Srpska itself, either prior to the war, during the war, and then following the war. However, I came across a significant number of archives or oral sources available for this research to be made. And this is how I drafted my PhD proposal. The fact that I was lucky enough to do my PhD in a research center in Sciences Po X, who was more focusing on war studies on one hand, and a research center at the LMU that was really focused on South European history, really helped me combine the two. And I really think that what my PhD has brought to the field is this idea that you can have a history of wartime and post-war Bosnia-Herzegovina that is not made only from the perspective of liberal peace-building international actors or through the use of notions like reconciliation or the big dominant notions and concepts of the field, but that you can use a more micro or mezzo level scale of analysis to see what has been going on in an entity that is absolutely central in understanding the mechanism of post-war Bosnia-Herzegovina political history.
And do I get a little bit that you're a bit skeptical about, let's say, these kind of transitional justice initiatives that work with these concepts, or not?
I think I put my foot in my.
Or is this a difficult question?
No, this is not a difficult question. Actually, I have a lot to say about it. So, but we go straight ahead into the heart of the. No, Actually, let's keep in touch, because we have a special issue with a dear friend of mine coming up on academic research on the state of academic research on Bosnia and Herzegovina. And our starting point was the fact that because of funding channels, because of the deep connections between policymaking and academic research in Bosnia and Herzegovina, because of the very strong presence of international politics into the perception of the past and current crisis in the country, research production has been extremely centered on those top-down processes. And I wanted to shift the focus to a more ingrown domestic, bottom-up dynamics.
So more grassroots, but also sort of, as you said, the mezzo level. So
Exactly.
you know the structures of power that have grown out locally, let's say.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And the fact that they represent legacies from the war.
Yeah.
Because, for example, like the relations, or like I like to call it a patron-client system, because it's really a systemic phenomenon. Patron-client system between Republika Srpska and Serbia. It's a direct continuum from the wartime period, and the field in which this system manifest is different from the wartime period.
Can you say a little bit more about this system? I mean, is there a story to tell about this, about these connections between Serbia and Republika Srpska? Do you see kind of changes, for instance, in this relationship, or perhaps certain problems that emerged on, in this trajectory, let's say during the war, but also after the war?
Of course, of course. First of all, I would say that the choice I made to call it a system more than relations, it's because it relies on really an array of individuals and collective groups that directly shape, design, and benefit from this system. So it's an enterprise that has been carried out since 1991. The actors might have changed because of, the institutional regime changes, political changes that have occurred in the region since 1991. However, you still have these circulations, this multi-positioning of actors, the fact that even for outside of the political elites, the way the Drina is, even though it's an international border, is not conceived as such. You have so many projects that rely on an integrative objective of the regions on the two banks of the Drina, like the Podrinje project, for example, can develop on that later. So it's really something that has moved from patron state Serbia giving to Republika Srpska the means to fight a war, financial, man-force means to fight the war in the 90s, to patron state Serbia giving to Republika Srpska the means to stand out as a distinct entity between Bosnia and Herzegovina, and therefore to reclaim in the end, and this is what we have seen in the last decade, to reclaim its state-like status, statehood status within Bosnia and Herzegovina.
Yeah. Can you tell us a little bit more about the way you work?
Yes.
Yeah. So we had, while preparing for this interview, already, a huge discussion about doing interviews and all of this.
Yes.
Perhaps you could tell us a little bit how you work as an academic in terms of let's say accessing,
of course,
the data that you need. Yeah.
So, as I mentioned in the beginning, I'm an historian.
You're a historian, yeah.
So archives are, of course, like central, they have a central role for me because I think it's also, and this is more of a methodological reflection, but I think it's also interesting to do the political history of an entity like Republika Srpska that has been like an ad hoc entity, like prior to 1992, probably I'm gonna get a lot of backlash about that, but prior to 1992, it doesn't have any form of existence, neither historical, administrative, so how do you make the political history of this kind of entity? Yeah. And actually, the archive funds are very rich.
Even before 91 or so, or 92, 91.
So prior to 91, you don't really, you can only rely on Obština archives, municipal archives, or on the states, the Republican archives of Bosnia and Herzegovina. Yeah. For example, to grasp, this is something I used to do, to see the military structure of the Yugoslav army in Bosnia and Herzegovina prior to the war. But really, as early as even before the 9th of January 1992, that is the official proclamation
of the
independence of Republika Srpska, you do have documents that testify of the fact that it started functioning like a distinct entity within Bosnia and Herzegovina. It comes first from the presidency, and then you have the constitution of relevant ministries, which have been very active. It's not shallow institutions. They do function. And especially the core of my sources were found in the archives of the Ministry of Defense, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and the Presidency of Republika Srpska. I must add that those ministries, not the presidency, but because the presidency survived Dayton, but those ministries were supposed to be dissolved after the Dayton Peace Agreement. However, they kept on functioning for a tiny little bit more. And then I could also see post-war, post-Dayton, how those ministries kept on functioning and how the war changed their missions and the way they had to interact with, for example, in the case of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, how they would interact with foreign governments.
But you already told me you did quite a bit of interviews.
Exactly.
Yeah. So can you perhaps say a little bit more about the status of these interviews? Why did you have to do these interviews in sort of in the context of your research design, for example? And did I hear that you also did sort of perhaps anthropological type of field work where you go to events and actually try to get a taste of, atmospheres?
My own medicine in the case you're talking about. No, exactly. So I got really carried away by the archives because I think they are
you're
really
a historian.
Yes. And also I think not so many people actually went to the archives in Banja Luka to study the domestic politics of Republika Srpska, but I really try to complement those archives by oral interviews, because when you work on such a contemporary history, it's worth it to, try to give more flesh, let's say, to what you would collect from the archives. So I did two types of interviews. First, with former soldiers from the VRS, so the Vojska Republike Srpske, the Army of Republika Srpska, and the connections between VRS and paramilitary organizations with Serbia during the war. Those were the one that in the end I ended up working on the least because of a set of problematic ethical considerations I'll be happy to go more into detail, but those were not exactly the most productive interviews I had made, because I didn't really know quite well how to do with the information I was dealing with.
And to raise actually information that you wanted to hear, or because people were, I mean, we talked a little bit, but it was sometimes hard for you to actually get them to talk about certain things, huh?
The mechanisms of, Serbia equipping or like arming or training paramilitary organizations or the VRS was the core of my interviews, but I didn't get satisfying answer in that regard, as I told you, because either the middle ranked people were not officers were not willing to talk, and the people really at the bottom of the hierarchy were, I believe, not necessarily aware of this kind of connections. But the problem was the discussion really moved toward discussing their wartime individual experience and what they had done on the field. That's why I ended up with very sensitive informations that were not suited for my research, and which I didn't really know how to exploit, because I couldn't completely change the topic of my research.
But people were willing to talk about these things.
Their own roles. Way too much. Way too much for my own taste. In the sense that I believe that also in terms of positionality, I believe that the fact that I was a young woman, at the time I was 22, so I was, a baby for them. I mean, I think it really gave them confidence, because they were seeing me as inoffensive, probably.
You were not threatening,
No. For example, we discussed your experience. I don't think they took the same precautions with me as they did with you. This is something that came much later in my career. No, I think that really, and you have this bit of like toxic masculinity at play, like yes, we are going to impress her. So I believe most of what they said were true, but maybe it was a bit,
sanitized or perhaps
or romanticized also, like this expérience du combattant, I don't know how you say in English, but
combatant's experience.
Combatant experience was a bit romanticized, I would say, to some extent. And then the other set of interview I did more for the PhD was with officials in the Republika Srpska who were involved in the design and implementation of those patron-client politics. So, for example, officials in RS government involved in the in more educative focused policies, for example, to ensure the accreditation on both sides of the Drina of like high school or academic
to
degrees.
harmonize the curriculum, for example.
Yes.
These type of things.
Yes. This is part of a special relation agreement. That is renewed quite often, and this is one of the first measures that was. So first it was academic degrees in 2001, and now it's also like high school degrees to allow Bosnian Serb pupils, students, to go study in Serbia, and the other way around. Like I'm not sure the other way around really happens so often, but or like. You have a lot of programs initiated by Serbia toward the Serbs of the region, and therefore, you have in each ministry, public administration of the Republika Srpska, people who are dedicated to this kind of program. So I met those people who invest in like religious affairs, businesses. So this. Really a wide range of state and state entity, or non-state, meaning like more association.
Were there any kind of kind of hiccups in this relationship, because it was not always, I would say, a very harmonious type of relationship, wasn't it, between Serbia and Republika Srpska?
Yes.
Is there still something, while you were doing the interviews, of this kind of resentment that you felt, for example, or forms of criticism on the role of Serbia in Republika Srpska?
The resentment came from late stage career officials, meaning people who
were quite high up in the hierarchy, so
not necessarily quite up, but at least were more like in the end of their career, meaning that they had served in the Yugoslav administration and who really went for the nationalistic turn. They really embraced it. And they were really, I have some interviews where people were very critical about Milosevic, like, letting go of Republika Srpska in Dayton. Among the younger generation, I think there is more the idea that Republika Srpska is not under jeopardy at the moment. It's like it's an entity protected by an international peace agreement. I mean, it would literally take a war to dissolve it. So there is among the younger generation of public officials in RS the idea that Republika Srpska is a fait accompli, and that there is the need to work for more integrative initiatives between Republika Srpska and Serbia in order to protect the status of Republika Srpska and go against any potential centralization trend that would give more competencies to the central institutions in Sarajevo than they have. This has been, Dodik, full rhetoric since 2012-13. Too many competencies have been transferred to the central. And we need to reclaim them. And in that regard, the fact that you have memorandums of cooperation between Serbia and Republika Srpska in the field of defense industry, in the field of energy, in the field of banking, business, it creates an illusion, a bubble, that Republika Srpska is fully autonomous from the rest of Bosnia and Herzegovina. And also
has then the entitlement perhaps to plan whatever, any kind of state with, joint shared entity with Serbia, or is it still on the agenda?
I think, but this is my personal opinion based on testimonies I've collected, based on so many years of living and researching in Republika Srpska. I believe no one is naive enough to think that Velika Serbia is
going to happen.
But I don't think that, on the other hand,
Velika Serbia is
Great Serbia. Sorry,
we have to.
Sorry to precise it. On the other hand, I don't think that anytime soon there will be a government in Republika Srpska willing to dismantle all Dodik's work, the president of Republika Srpska, like an autocrat who has turned the entity into a kind of ethnocracy, where all politics, or the whole political arena is completely ethnicized, and which has been capitalizing on this referendum secession rhetoric. I don't think there will be anytime soon a government that will be able to dismantle that and to draw the entity closer back towards Sarajevo. So it's there is this, I don't think absolutely Greater Serbia, no way. I'm not even sure they will secede because they are bankrupt. They don't have any money on whatever. but at the same time, you know, no one is willing to change the status quo pretty much.
But yeah, the last few years, I mean, I only hear kind of very pessimistic sort of, you know.
Yes, but because it's
from Bosnia that perhaps we are again at the threshold of a war or whatever. But I mean, on the other hand, I've heard this since 20 years already, let's say, you know, and nothing really happens. But do you think that the situation is actually more volatile at the moment, or do you think it's just
they have
same?
Operated a de facto secession? I mean,
Yeah.
they burned the bridges back in December 2021. So for like a whole set of like National Assembly of Republika Srpska refusing to recognize the validity of the decision of the Constitutional Court of Bosnia and Herzegovina, the fact that they want to withdraw from the tax system, they want to withdraw from the armed forces, they want to withdraw from like the health system. I mean, and they are doing it.
Yeah.
So it's not functioning anymore.
Yeah.
And so I think, will there be a war? This I don't know.
It's hard to predict.
If I was like, you know, a sidekick, I think I will be in a much different position right now. But I think that the worst that could happen in terms of guaranteeing that Bosnia and Herzegovina is a sovereign state has been done. And it has been done without any international official lifting a finger. So is Bosnia and Herzegovina as a sovereign independent state in jeopardy? I think it is.
Because of the lack of
reaction,
genuine international whatever backing up the state.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. So I mean, if it can come down to much worse, they can be like. And a few weeks ago, Dodik like gathered troops at the inter-entity borderline. I think it can, escalate like this. Like only if someone needs to light the fire, and it can. But it has bad. It's not because no one is shooting at each other that it's not bad.
We have to draw to an end almost.
Ready?
Yeah.
Wow.
But you made some interesting remark, and we're getting back a little bit to perhaps to look at your career in full. So where you actually studied in Aix-en-Provence, and basically sort of did kind of war studies or military history as sort of your discipline, perhaps. Yeah. But you wouldn't call yourself a military historian. Can you explain to us why?
Because I don't know if this is a transnational phenomenon, but like military historian, you really have this dimension of like a kind of study of the battles, like this. In France, we literally call that battle history. So this is why I prefer war studies. And like all French-speaking academics are going to go at me right now. But I think war study is much more comprehensive because it also allows us to borrow from other disciplines and also other historiographies to study war. Either war as a global phenomenon, or wars as
as localized clashes or whatever.
Exactly. So it can help us to study war as a social phenomenon, war as a cultural phenomenon. You have also the economic aspects of war that are really taken into account in this perspective. I collaborate so often with like anthropologists of war. So, and as you said earlier, it also allowed me to integrate into my methodology a lot of ethnographic fieldwork, going to observe military commemorations, or trying
for
to.
example,
for
from which you got kicked out. As
yes.
I understand.
So yeah, military commemorations, or also like
commemorative events, or
yes.
these type of things. Huh?
I'm trying to think of something. Oh yes, for example, for my other for my current research project, I have been doing some ethnographic field work in the representative offices of the Donetsk and Lugansk Republic in the EU. Mm-hmm. So I went there, like I had, of course, interviews with the representative leaders, but also I could, it really gave me the methodological tools and also the reflexes to analyze the materialities of their activities, this kind of. So this is why I prefer war studies. I think it's much more,
It's a broader concept of how you study arms conflict.
Exactly.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Totally.
Okay. So thank you very much for
you
this very
for
interesting conversation. I'm sure we could have talked for hours.
Yes.
Which we actually already did.
Yes.
But not on tape. But thank you very much, and hope to see you back soon in Regensburg again.
I hope so as well. Thank you.
Our podcast recommendation this month, NEOD Rewind episode 37, Navigating Field Research in Conflict, Affected Societies by the Institute for War, Holocaust and Genocide Studies in the Netherlands. Thank you for listening.